This is Julian, and I'm here with Ryan Holiday, who just released his new book, Ego is the Enemy. I'll put a link to it here below, as well as a link to the last video we did together, which I'm sure you're going to love as well. And what I thought we could do here is start by briefly defining what ego is, like what is the ego, and then just directly jump into some of the ideas from the book. One that I particularly loved is to be somebody or to do something.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny when I was writing the book. To me, I think the definition of ego is somewhat self-evident, right? I'm not talking about it in the Freudian sense. I'm talking about it in the the common parlance when we see someone whose estimation of themselves is wildly out of bounds with reality. When they think they're better than they are, they think they're better than other people, when they think that what they want matters more than anything and everything else. And so I'm sort of talking about the destructive effects that that attitude has on not only on the people around them, obviously, but on themselves.
Yeah, it's like that voice too. I liked when you said when you're becoming successful, it's that voice that tells you better than you are, but also when you're
Yeah.
failing, it's telling you you're worse than you are. So anything that's
Yeah,
distorted.
it's this naive belief that what you've done or what you have, that it says something about you as a person,
Yeah,
right? So if you think the car you drive says that you're better than other people, you're going to feel better than other people when you're successful and you have a nice car. But then if, God forbid that car is stolen or you lose all your money, all of a sudden you're going to think you're worse than other people because they have nicer cars than you. So that comes from a speech from John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot and then a military strategist. He would give this speech to every young man who would work for him that he saw having as having a lot of potential. He would give them what was called the to be or to do speech. And essentially what he was saying, and I think this is obviously much more relevant in a military setting, which is that just because you are promoted or put in some position of authority or power does not mean that you deserve those things or that you are the most sort of important or valuable part of the sort of machine, right? So he's basically saying, like, look, are you gonna covet favor, or are you gonna go out there and do real work that really matters, right? And I think this is true in every field that we're entering. As a writer, am I going to go out there and seek critical praise? Am I going to go out there and seek, selling lots and lots of copies, or am I going to try to write the best thing that I'm capable of doing? Am I going to try to make something that has impact and real value for people? And that's not to say that these are totally the opposite, that if you pursue having impact and you pursue doing the right thing, that you're not also going to be rewarded for it. But it's just making sure that you don't confuse, in his case, having a certain number of stars on your shoulder or winning a certain number of coveted appointments, that says that you're better than other people, or that says that you've made the right choices.
yeah. And that it also doesn't devalue the work that you do. Because that's what we're
Yes.
taught too. It's like, if you don't get any recognition, then what's the point? It's not good
Yeah,
work.
no, we often think that. We're like, hey, why don't they recognize how amazing I am? And if that's what's motivating you to do good work, you're going to be, I think, sorely disappointed in life. If the point is to do the right thing, in his case, to serve your country because you feel motivated to do that because you see value in that, right? Um, Oftentimes it's precisely in doing the right thing, in making those hard decisions, that you piss people off, that you hurt other people's feelings, that you have to take unpopular stands. And so you have to be able to separate that popularity from your purpose in life, because there are at times that they're going to be at odds with each other. And I think if you're repeatedly choosing pleasing other people over that purpose, you're going to end up very far from where you wanted to be when you were younger.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll force you to settle out on your dream. And one thing I
Exactly.
noticed too is with social media, it's fluctuating so fast. Like, say you post a video on YouTube, like this video here. If you're doing it for the praise, you'll see one positive comment, and like a second later, you get the negative one. So your state is continuously fluctuating. Like,
I think that's true, and I also find that as a writer, and I made videos and stuff too. You see, um, if you judge your best, like you'll make something and you'll think, okay, this is pretty good, and it'll do way better than you thought. And
Mm.
then you'll do something that you're incredibly proud of, that was, required some emotional courage or required extra dedication, that you worked harder on than you've worked on anything else. And that'll get no views, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to have your internal compass that tells you what's good and what's bad and what the work you're trying to do is and isn't. Because if you're deferring that judgment to how things do how many views they get or hits or whatever, you will be led down a path that I think gets you very far from what is actually important. You know what I mean? So you have to be the arbiter of your success ultimately, and you can't use the numbers to do that. As a writer, sometimes like you'll go like, man, that piece really blew up, like it did 10x what I thought.
Mm.
But if I only made articles like that,
Oh yeah.
I'd ultimately not have very many readers, and my relationship with those readers would not be very strong. So you have to resist the temptation both ways, right? You can't just be in your hole making things that only you care about. That's not a recipe for really any kind of success either. But if all you're doing is looking at the external signs of validation, I think you end up getting drifting really far astray.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talk about this too. You say, I think it's a chapter where it says what's important to you, like defining what is success to you.
Sure.
In terms of like either the work that's important so you don't get led astray, but also what you're chasing after, so it's not always more and more and more.
Yeah, I think these things are related, right? It's you have to know what kind of life you're after too. So if, let's say, the push and pull between like doing the things that are popular and doing the things that are intrinsically valuable to you, that's one thing. But then you're looking around and you're seeing other people like you, other writers, other bloggers, other designers, other artists, whatever it is, and you see that they're doing some other thing and they're maybe becoming more famous than you or more popular than you. And so you can start to go like, well, maybe I should do more like that. And you sort of judge yourself against these other people. And you have to ask yourself, like, do I actually want their life? What am I trying to accomplish here? Right. If you don't know sort of how much money do you actually need to have the life that you want? What sort of freedom do you want to be able to be happy? What is your or for you in some of the pickup space, it's like some guys are happier in relationships, some guys are not happier in relationships. But if you're just arbitrarily comparing yourself to other people and not asking yourself, hey, am I doing what motivates me, what's important to me? You might feel that you're less of a man because you're not doing this thing, but actually when you do that thing, it doesn't make you happy, right? So you see a lot of people sort of get whipped around chasing or copying other people instead of thinking, okay, what do I want? What makes me happy? And what am I working towards?
Mm. Yeah, with the pickup space, as a little side note, I see that all the time. Like guys refusing to settle down in a relationship because they think
Sure.
it's like now bad, or they're less than everyone else who keep going out.
Yeah, or likewise, guys who are in relationships, going like, well, these guys are out hooking up with all
Mm.
these women. Are they more of a man than me? And it's like, you could do that if you wanted to, but you have to ask yourself, do you want to? And
Yeah.
if the answer is yes, then you should go do it. And if the answer is, actually, I've tried it and it doesn't make me happy, then you should stop comparing yourself to other people who are pursuing totally different lifestyles than you. So I think ultimately what it comes down to is sort of a place of non-judgment. Like you let other people do what they want to do and you focus on doing what you want to do, and that's what you're measuring yourself against.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the hardest to do. It's kind of like step back from everything, because
Totally.
we talked about like, if you're like a YouTuber, blogger, artist, writer, but just everyone, like with Facebook, for example, you're continuously blasted with, now this is the thing you need. This is the thing you need. This is what this person's doing. You're like,
Yeah.
you never take the time to ask yourself, what do I need? What do I want?
Yeah, yeah. You see that someone posted, some vacation on Instagram, and you go, "Oh, well, why are they doing that? Like, are they better than me?" And you don't think, maybe this person is in crippling credit card debt, or maybe this person, is deeply unhappy. You're not thinking about. You're just looking at this material possession or this experience that they had, and you're thinking about whether you should have it too, or how that compares to you. And this is, this is a form of ego. This is trying to basically have everything all at once instead of asking yourself, you know, where does this fit into their life? It's funny, often we're envious of other people, but we don't stop and appreciate what we have that other people are envious of us for, right?
Mm.
And so it's sort of, what lens are you going to look at it? Are you going to look at it like, I need more, 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 I don't have enough? Or are you going to look at sort of from a place of gratitude and contentment about what you do have?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you wrote that. I love that one quote where it says, ego is about like having zero trade-offs. When
Yes.
it comes to life, it's like it's all about the trade-offs. Like there are always trade-offs. Yeah.
Totally, totally. Everything comes with trade-offs, and we don't, like, when we look at what we don't have, we rarely think about what we got
Mm.
as a trade-off for that, and vice versa. And we should make sure we're doing that with other people. If you see someone who's more successful than you go like, oh, they're not as good as me, I should have that. But you rarely go like, okay, what did they sacrifice in order to get that thing? And am I actually willing to make a similar sacrifice?
Another point here, you say this: don't get intoxicated by ego, by power, by
Yeah.
pride. I mean, this is something I've deeply fallen into in the past. What advice do you have there for anyone who's, say, you're either starting on your journey, you're getting a little bit of feedback, or you may even do what you just said, where you look at someone who's successful, you're like, well, I have this that they don't have, and then kind of getting high off your own supply.
Yeah, I think that objectivity is really important in sort of breaking things down. So I talk about the Stoics a lot in the book, and Marcus Aurelius is, he's the guy that I tend to quote the most, and he's the emperor of Rome, and when you read his meditations, he's often breaking things down. So he's going like, the emperor is the only one that was allowed to wear a purple cloak,
Mm.
right? And so in one of the lines in meditations, he goes like, this purple cloak is basically just the same as a regular cloak, but it's dyed with shellfish blood. That's how they would get the color purple for the royal garments. And so he's like, okay, I have this thing, and I might be tempted to think, oh, this says that I'm better than everyone else. But let me see what it actually is. Let me break it down and see what it represents, right? So it's like, you're sitting in the back of the plane in economy, and you're looking at the people in coach, and or sorry, in first class, and you might think they're better than you. Or conversely, you might be sitting in first class and think that you're better than the people in economy. But the reality is, this is just a slightly better chair on the same airplane that costs, 5 times as much. And that it's still unpleasant, it's not that nice, right? So I think part of it is that objectivity of just looking at these things. I'm not saying it's not fun to drive a nice car. Like, I don't drive like some beater, but you think, hey, is this actually that special? Does this actually, basically what it comes down to, I think, is that with almost every material possession, the only thing that it says about you is that you had enough money to buy it. That's all that it says, right? It doesn't say that you have better taste. It doesn't say that you're smarter. It doesn't say that you're luckier. It doesn't say anything but that you could pay what it costs. And given how complicated finances can be, it doesn't even necessarily mean you could actually afford it. It means someone loaned you the money to afford it. So the point is, I think, instead of looking at what we have and feeling that sort of intoxication of how awesome or beautiful or amazing they are, which is what advertising and branding is designed to make us do, it's to try to see them as objectively and as clearly as possible. Sometimes even looking at them a bit cynically, so we can sort of counteract that puffing up that branding adds to things.
Yeah. Yeah, not falling for the glamour that we project on it.
Totally.
Yeah, and yeah, so facts from stories, basically. And this is not just with objects, but even people or ourselves.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what's that saying? They say, like, you see some beautiful woman and you're really intimidated by her. It's like, someone broke up with that person or they wouldn't be single, right? Or you see really rich, powerful people, and it's like they go through airplane security just like you do. They lose their temper just like you do. They make mistakes just like you do. It's just sort of reminding yourself that that putting people and things up on a pedestal is usually a form of lying to yourself and to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean everyone has this. Like the
Hmm.
example I use all the time is just like a cell phone. It's like
Yeah,
when you first get it, you're like, "Whoa, the new cell phone!" Like say
yeah,
the new iPhone. There's a whole story. A
yeah.
year passes, and you're just like, whatever.
Totally. I mean, I love watching like movies that are like 20 years old and you see like a really rich person driving what was then like, a brand new BMW. And but to you, you see a 25-year-old BMW, right? That doesn't look that nice.
Mm,
And so it's also the way that this sort of arms race is always making things better and more impressive. But with time, when you can sort of see them from the perspective of time, you realize that they kind of all blur together and they're not that special.
yeah, or they change. Like
Yeah,
for a guy, say back in the '50s, you wanted to be the hairy-chested type of
right,
dude, and now it's
right.
like more of the effeminate side, and you're like, well, which
Totally.
one? Yeah,
Yeah, you just realize that at the end of the day, all this stuff is bullshit, and that if you think about it too much, it detracts from life. It detracts from your quality of life.
yeah. One of the challenges, I mean, I had, when I went all out with my ego taking over, pride
Yeah,
taking over.
I think we all do.
My Yeah, so one of the challenges I would have had, say, and I still do a bit to this day, is I'd hear this, and then there's that little voice again, your ego saying, "Yeah, but you're still above that."
The insidious part of ego is that it's really good at spotting ego in other people, and it sort of does that as a way of not having to spot it in itself. So, like for
Mm,
instance, I'll get this question all the time. People go like, "Now, how do I deal with other people's egos?" And it's like, why don't you not even think about that? Why don't you just focus on your own? So, I totally agree. I think look. I opened the book with that quote from Richard Feynman where he's saying, like the first rule is that you don't fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool. And so I think it's sort of a reminder that like actually. You're not as great as you think you are. You have plenty of stuff to work on, plenty of stuff to improve, and to remember that in some ways, um, you know, taking pride in how humble you are is a form of ego as
yeah,
well, right? So that sort of sense, I think oftentimes people will think they're not egotistical, but really they're just like the person leaning against the wall judging everyone else, right? Or they are thinking really egotistical things, they're just not saying them.
hmm
And that's the same problem just manifesting itself in a different way.
yeah, yeah. It's like I used to have an ego, but I dropped it. But look at me now, so it just sneaks in
So,
continuously. Yeah.
totally, yeah. I mean, there's that quote from Muhammad Ali where he says, like, it's hard to be as humble when you're as great as I am.
Mm,
It's yeah, that's right. That's why you really have to work at it. You know what I mean? Like, the better you are, the more you have to think about these things. I had a conversation with a really famous author a few years ago, and I was like, what's it like? Like, you've sold like millions of books. Like, that's so like, because to me, he was like the pinnacle of like what an author could accomplish, right? And I remember he was like, I haven't sold as many books as like, and he listed like five other people, right? And then I was like, oh, that's really smart. So like he's like in the way that I'm comparing myself to him. So like instead of letting my success go to my head, he's doing the same thing just at another level, right? And so it's like when you have that little sprint of success, if all you're thinking about is like the people that are beneath you or the people that you beat to get where you're going, that's going to fill up your head and make you think that you're better than other people. But if instead you focus on how far you have left to go, or how,
mm.
historically what you've accomplished is utterly insignificant and doesn't, even remotely add up, like I think that can help sort of damper some of these things down.
Building on what we talked about before,
Yeah.
not telling yourself, stories about other people or objects, but also yourself and like your
Yes.
story, where you came from, how everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, right, right. What's that? There's that Drake song, like we started from the bottom. It's like that's the opposite of where Drake started, right? And so like I get from an artistic perspective, you can tell whatever story you want, but I think a lot of people do that, like successful people try to paint themselves as having, been self-made, which is totally not honest, right? You should embrace the reality of the situation that you came from, and you want to make sure that you're not telling yourself a story about what happened. not because like it changes what happened, but it changes how you view the future. So if you tell yourself this story about how you're this, incredibly hardworking person who pulled themselves up from their bootstraps and made, something from nothing, but like a Donald Trump, but the reality is like you just inherited your money and you did well with what you inherited, but you didn't make this out of nothing. What that changes in the future is the way that you perceive your abilities. You're now instead of looking at the ways that you got lucky or looking at the advantages that you had, you are lying to yourself about your capabilities, and that's going to affect your future performance.
I'd say the last thing to touch on here is you say, like being aware of your ego is like sweeping the floor. There's never a point where you're done doing it or a point where it stops sneaking up. As soon as we think that it's gone, it's still there in some way or another.
Yeah, I guess I'm not saying that like egolessness is possible, right? And I'm not saying that I don't have an ego. I'm saying that it's this thing you have to constantly be aware of, especially because one, you're going to be in different phases in your life and the ego is going to manifest itself differently in those phases. But also, that ego is going to look differently at different, when you're on top, it's going to look one way. When you're on the bottom, it's going to look another way. When you're going through a tough time, it's going to look another way. And I think on top of that as well, it's like you can do some of this work and it's going to come creeping back in, through it's going to come up. It's like whack-a-mole. You're going to knock it down over here and then it's going to pop up over here. So it's not like, hey, if you meditate or, hey, you read this book or, hey, you think about it for a little while, you're not going to have ego. You have to constantly be evaluating the choices you make and the things that you say and the things that you believe to make sure that you're not doing or acting out of ego.
Yeah, because even meditating, it's like now you're the guy who meditates.
Right. Yeah. Now you can start to feel like superior to all the other people who don't meditate or whatever. You sell all your possession. Let's say you found that you were being very materialistic and that was, making you feel superior to other people. So then you sell all your possessions and now you feel superior to everyone because you're a minimalist. The reality is you should just be looking at this on a constant basis and saying, why am I doing this? Why do I feel this way? Where is this judgment coming from? When your job is to have opinions for a living, you start to have a lot of dumb opinions too. And so like I have to think about that a lot. It's like I realize that, okay, so like you asked me a question, I'm supposed to have an answer, right? Like that's how this works. But I realized that I would catch myself in the rest of my life, like someone would ask me a question and I wouldn't know the answer. And instead of saying like, I don't know, I would feel like I had to answer. And so I just found like I was just making shit up all the time. And so that was something I had to catch myself. And then I had to work on sort of establishing a habit and, a mindset where I felt, I'm going to say I don't know, or I'm going to let someone else speak here. And I'm not going to try to, I got to realize that what I do for a living is somewhat different than who I am as a person. And I have to work on that. And I'm sure next week I'll catch something different about myself. And it's sort of this continual process of just making sure that you're not being ruled by this sort of delusional force in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, and having close people too who can just give you like that raw, honest feedback.
Yeah, you need someone who can be like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? You sound like an idiot. And you're like, oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what I realized. Like with videos, I'd put them out and like you have like hundreds upon hundreds of comments and it's like, most of them are like, yes, because, they love you. So it's that trap where you can easily just be cheered off the cliff. So it's like, totally. No matter what you do, you're being cheered on. So it's like, okay, Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess, to kind of recap here, it really comes down to being honest with yourself, whatever you can do to, realize what being honest with yourself is and not being afraid of that authenticity, either privately or publicly, if you make mistakes, putting it out there.
It's rigorous self-honesty and then embracing what you find there.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah,
awesome, man. Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for doing this. As I mentioned before, I'll put a link to your book here below. If you're watching this, I highly recommend checking it out. And as always, Until next time. So if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a comment here below, as I personally read every single one myself. And if you're new to this channel, be sure to smash that subscribe button, share the video, tag a friend, you know the deal, and check out some of the other ones as well, as I post on here every single week on topics that range from business, self-actualization, spirituality, and so much more. So get on that now, and once again, thanks for watching.